You're listening to our social TV newscast, and every day we have a chat to individuals, people, organizations, companies that are really doing the best they can during this COVID lockdown period. And today's no different. Today we have a chat to Andy Hadfield, who is the CEO of For Good. And For Good is one of those amazing platforms. It really has galvanized South Africans, I would argue people around the world, to really think about how they give back and the way they give back. Andy, thank you very much for making time to have a chat with us.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Now, Andy, you sent us a press release, and I know you're always one of those guys that you're kind of ahead of the curve. You're always thinking about what next. So at the moment, we're talking about virtual volunteering. This thing has exploded, but for some of us, we're hearing that term for the very first time. What's virtual volunteering?
Yeah, great question. I mean, it's interesting in South Africa that virtual volunteering hasn't taken off quicker. Let's start with a simple definition. If you mentor someone, that can be volunteering. You mentor someone over WhatsApp, that's virtual volunteering. So it's giving back and volunteering that can be done over the internet. But maybe it's better to take a step back and describe what For Good is. So all your listeners and viewers can go to forgood.co.za while we chat. We are the biggest volunteering platform in South Africa, with this particular focus on donating time and skills, goods and money. Although the majority of stuff that comes to us is time and skills-based volunteering. I think what makes us unique is that we've built something of a social impact marketplace. So we have 416, I think I looked at the count, nonprofits from across South Africa. They load up what they need in real time. So these needs come straight from the ground, from the beneficiaries, from the communities that are being supported by these NPOs. And those needs are what you respond to as a volunteer. So you could think of us as a social impact matchmaker, online dating for the charity sector, however you want to. But it is a much more meaningful and relevant match when you're responding to a need that has been posted by a non-profit. So that's us in a nutshell. And inside that environment, one of the ways you can give back is this virtual volunteering trend. So how do you help when you're locked down? Well, you use the internet and all these crazy tools that are available to us these days.
And a lot of people, Andy, will, and I think this is the beautiful thing that you've done. You've really challenged us to still be part of a solution. How have you found people responding on the ground? I mean, your product, your project is very specific, but what's the kind of conversations that you're having on the ground from a For Good perspective?
Yeah, so I think there's two sides to this. So the one would be, how are the NPOs, the causes, the NGOs, whatever you want to call them, our social impact organizations, how are they responding? And then how are the givers responding? So the people that want to get involved. I certainly don't want to speak on behalf of the NPOs, but it's been a tough journey for them. They've, I wouldn't say panicked, but even thinking about things like being an essential service. Is quite tricky when you think about the social impact industry. So what is an essential service? If you're running a feeding scheme for kids, you probably aren't marked as a typically essential service, and yet if you don't run your feeding scheme, the kids don't get fed. So I think we've heard a lot of conversations like that coming from the ground. The volunteers' perspective, it's been a lot more positive. I mean, some things have happened that we really didn't expect to happen. So, for instance, usually, it's weird on For Good, but usually when there is any kind of social or cultural upheaval, traffic on the site just dies. It's very odd. If you go back to Pravin Gate, Nene Gate, Fees Must Fall, any kind of upheaval, we see traffic just die. People revert back to charity starts at home, I think, and they look after themselves. And it has been the complete opposite during the pandemic, the lockdown, the lead up to the coronavirus as it was spreading around the world. Traffic on our public sites, because we run forgood.co.za and then we run 15 corporate employee volunteering programs off the same platform. But traffic on the public side has quadrupled. So there's been an enormous upsurge in people wanting to find ways to give back. And they've done that under the banner of virtual volunteering. Might be useful to take a look at some of the things that are happening. So how are they giving back? And so we did an emailer recently where we put together like a guide to giving, and we gave some examples of what people are doing. Here's just a few. And these are real volunteer kind of connections that happen through the site. So a market researcher was helping with phone calls to the elderly and disabled. An architect was redesigning an NPO's premises. An executive from a corporate was helping to review a sustainability plan. A psychology student was offering counseling for girls. A gym bunny, that's probably my word, was creating video content for home exercise routines. A lawyer was helping with legal contracts. These are all things that have happened in the last couple of weeks. And interestingly enough, they're all things that can happen virtually. They're all things that can happen between a volunteer and an organization using the internet.
Yeah, Andy, I want to jump in there very quickly. There's something interesting that you mentioned a little bit earlier. Obviously, you guys manage volunteering programs on behalf of corporates. How have corporates reacted at this time? I mean, because a lot of these volunteering programs, this is an opportunity to educate us. But I would assume that it was happening within the bricks and mortar business, and now you're finding employees working from home. But how have corporates responded to kind of where we find ourselves at the moment?
Yeah, it's been fascinating. So their response was extremely swift and extremely generous. So I would say, firstly, a lot of operational CSI budgets, which now obviously can't be used because we're locked down. And I think many of us expected this lockdown to get extended from the beginning. So you're talking about a month and a half of operational budget at the least. That got turned very quickly into monetary donations that went straight to organizations. So that was really nice to see. And that literally happened within the first week. It was extremely quick. Then most of the corporates that we work with, and this is kind of the who's who of the JSE, there really are some very pioneering and big brands. They all launch virtual volunteering campaigns because there isn't a lot of other ways that you can give back. You can give money, which is great, and money is often a really easy, low friction way to contribute. It can be used by the organization in the way that they know best. Or you can give skills. You can give skills over the internet. So most of our corporates launched immediate virtual volunteering campaigns. Communications went out, supported by the executives, to these big staff complements of 5, 10, 15, 20,000 people. And then those corporate employees who were also locked down, who were also going through the same thing that you and I have been, is like, how do you work remotely? Who can work remotely? Who's essential? Who has to come to work? Who doesn't? In amongst that, there's time now. And so those employees were looking through these things and starting to give their skills.
Now, I can imagine obviously you're the expert in the room talking about virtual volunteering. So I can only imagine there's this scramble to get the system set up. And then as the system matures, and I use that quite loosely because it's only been a couple of weeks, but are you finding that you gave us some really cool examples, but are you also finding from your engagement that the conversation around virtual volunteering has become richer, that people are now getting it and they are starting to kind of spread their kind of thinking, kind of conversation about what more can we do, how can we do it, how do we track it? Are you finding the conversations are becoming richer?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very astute observation. It's been fascinating over the last 5 years. We live in such a generous country, but the way South Africans give is often very different to traditional mainstream volunteering. And we see that from a couple of angles. So, if you look at employee volunteering or just volunteering in the developed world, it's a very mainstream behavior. All companies do it. It's kind of just baked into culture, especially if you're looking US, UK, Europe, those kind of cultures. In South Africa, this traditional volunteering is still really, really new. And it's been an uphill struggle over the last 5 years to build this movement, to build this culture. All it took was a global pandemic to kind of accelerate it seems. And I don't think that's because South Africans aren't generous. As I said in the beginning, we're an extremely generous nation. We're just generous in different ways. So think about what competes for our giving attention. Extended community giving, extended family giving, black tax, traffic light tax. That might not be very politically correct, but South Africans have the opportunity to give at many traffic lights. And there's faith-based giving, tithing, things like that. There's a lot competing for our giving attention. And so this mainstream idea of skills-based volunteering, taking what you are good at from a professional point of view or from a passion point of view and sharing that with the organization so that they can amplify those skills, that just wasn't a normal behavior. And it has been really interesting to see over the last 2 to 3 weeks how suddenly the fact that we're all locked down has made our skills kind of come into the spotlight. And yes, I mean, I would say that these conversations have matured really, really quickly. Some of the social media campaigns we're running at the moment have never performed as well in the history of For Good. It's a message that just seems to be resonating at the moment.
Now, I know you as somebody, I've seen you at events. I know you ask the tough questions. I've got to ask you a question, and I think you've got some insight here. How does this change the CSR, shared value, integrated landscape? Because as you've said before, as you've stated before, the traditional way of doing these things have changed over the last couple of weeks, and might even change for another couple of weeks, another couple of months. How does that affect stuff like those reports that we read at the end of the year, where they talk about the industry being 10.7 billion rand, and they talk about the kind of the attractive parts of the industry, which now is education, and that kind of social development? How does that does it change anything, or are we still kind of on the same hamster wheel?
Yeah, tricky question. So it might sound cynical, but a lot of that 10 billion rand in the CSI industry is directly related to regulation. So it's the socioeconomic development part of the triple BEE scorecard, where companies are highly incentivized to give at least 1% net profit after tax to socioeconomic development causes, which is essentially NPOs. And if you're brutal about it, it's 18A tax efficient NPOs so that you can get a tax certificate on those donations as well. That's kind of the cynical view. A lot of the base of the industry is built up on that. That doesn't mean there aren't a whole bunch of really well-intentioned and well-meaning people who play within that industry. How will it change? From a regulation perspective, I'm not sure. You may find that triple BEE will be relaxed to an extent to help with economic recovery. I think that would be a fascinating call to make, in which case it would go one of two ways. It would either increase because you see people's true goodwill come out, or the amount that CSI contributes to the socioeconomic sector would just collapse because it's no longer regulated. Where I think the more interesting thing to play around with is how big brands and their customers engage around issues of social importance. I mean, typically big brands, unless they're very brave, stay away from these sorts of issues. Anything to do with social, healthcare, economic, they tend to stay away because it's often politically charged, especially in South Africa. And yet now, with the pandemic and with the lockdown, you have these brands who are opening up their customer communities to volunteer, to crowdfund, to find some way to contribute to a shared social cause. So I think, if I was being positive about it, that's where I would look for changes to happen, is brands being a bit braver in terms of taking on these issues and exposing these issues to their customer communities. We're certainly seeing a bit of that. That would be one response.
Second last question. I want to get back very quickly to the technology around virtual volunteering. A lot of us over the last couple of weeks would have had to get to grips with Zoom, Team Microsoft. Some of us used our laptops just to send emails. Now we've got to do a little bit more with it. How have you guys made it from a technology perspective? And I'm sure it's probably just a cell phone and a laptop. But I can only imagine that when you're talking about virtual volunteering, you got to keep it as simple and as easy to engage with. Am I getting the right sense of it?
Yeah, completely. In fact, we built For Good from the beginning to operate almost entirely over email as a minimum. You can get as fancy as you like with technology, but who hasn't sat on a video call that breaks up and people come and go and kids run in the background? That's just the reality of life. So if you look through a lot of these things that are happening from a virtual volunteering perspective, a lot of them can literally be done by email. So not only are there activities happening by email, but the whole For Good platform operates by email. You go dive into that marketplace of what causes need in terms of their response to the pandemic or anything else. And when you choose something, we essentially hook you up with that cause via email. Okay. Now we own the data points, and so we can do some cool things with that from a reporting perspective, and encouraging you to deliver on what you promised. But the essential connection gets made over email. When someone creates an offer of particular services, we match that out. Sure, using some fancy geographical and category matching, but we match it out over email. And NPOs and causes will respond to you via email. Go through some of the things that are happening. Let's look at a couple more examples. Volunteers creating marketing material and infographics for an NPO. That can be done over email. That's your laptop using the tool and sending it via email. An accountant preparing an asset inventory register. That's a couple of phone calls, Excel, and email. Volunteers helping to motivate grade 12s by tutoring maths and science online. That can be done via WhatsApp. If you want the really personal touch, that could be done via WhatsApp video. But we do try and keep it to email because that's especially bandwidth sensitive. So we have picked up very quickly that some of the communities and the beneficiaries that our NPOs support, bandwidth is a real problem. And it's all very well to say, we're going to hook you up with an executive of a big company to mentor you via video chat, but you only have 5 megs of data left. So email is pretty efficient and pretty effective as a communication tool, at least to start that relationship. And should it move to something more complex, it can.
Now, there's a ton of ways you can virtually volunteer, and I think you've given us some really, really great examples. But what is top of mind if you want to virtually volunteer? What's the first thing you would say to that person who wants to volunteer to make sure that they can? Because it's not the once off. We're not after somebody just dipping their toes in the water once off. You want this continuous, sustained volunteering process. So what's the advice you would give somebody, a him or her, who's thinking about volunteering?
Well, I suppose the first thing is to not worry that this is a lifelong commitment you're getting into. And I think that probably scares people off volunteering is, I do this once and I'm going to be hounded by this organization till kingdom come, to give up my time. There's so much that can be done in a once-off fashion. What we were just talking about, designing infographics, that's not a repetitive function. That's a little project that can be done. So my first piece of advice would be that the commitments can differ. Choose something you're passionate about. If you enjoy it, if you enjoy this particular skill that you have, then you're going to enjoy imparting that skill to other people. And then I'd also say that there's a lot of different ways you can approach this. So if you go to forgood.co.za and you click on campaigns, you'll see we're almost exclusively on Corona response at the moment. But we split it up into a couple of categories. So you can give money. Okay? Super easy to give money, anything from 50 Rand and above. It all really helps. Non-profits really need unrestricted funding right now. What that means is often when you get funding from big donors, they come with certain restrictions, like how you are meant to spend it, what percentage of it comes from, what percentage of it can be spent on overheads and, supporting your own staff. So there are complexities there. Money given through For Good and many other crowdfunding platforms is usually completely unrestricted funding and therefore quite powerful. So you can give money. That takes you all of a minute. Okay? And we've got a couple of interesting themes for you to give against, or you can just browse through all the coronavirus-related projects to fund. Then it's almost like an introvert-extrovert type of thing. So, you're an introvert. Why don't you go online shopping for a cause? We saw that starting to pop up just organically, and so we created a campaign around it. You can go to Discount, Checkers, Take-A-Lot, Uber Eats, any of these platforms. You can order essential items through an e-commerce interface, and just instead of delivering it to your house, connect with the NPO and deliver it to them. So we've seen quite a lot of that happening, and that's really clever. Again, that takes you 10 minutes. You don't have to engage with anyone if you're an introvert, and you can make some real impact by giving people resources in the real world. And then you've got your kind of traditional virtual volunteering, so your skills-based transfer. And as I said, that can be very short-term, project-driven. Design an infographic, translate a piece of corona-related content into Zulu, or it can be more repetitive. So mentor the CEO of an NPO, mentor the beneficiary of an NPO, and hundreds of other different ideas. So there's kind of the landscape of digital or virtual giving these days.
Andy, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate you coming onto our platform. And then very quickly, people want to log on. You've said that email the website so many times, but is there a website and an email maybe people can reach out to?
Yeah, forgood.co.za, FORGOOD. You can find us on Facebook, For Good SA. You can find us on Twitter, For Good SA, Instagram, For Good Hood. Email if you want, contact@forgood.co.za. I highly encourage you to check us out on social and check out the website. It really is very easy to use, and just explore this marketplace of amazing little giving opportunities and giving experiences that are happening in South Africa right now.
For more stories like these, go to www.social-tv.co.za. Subscribe to us on YouTube and follow us on our social mediums.